So this is going to be a demo of Flutter running in an iframe, Flutter running in an HTML tag, and Flutter communicating with JavaScript in the hosting web app through a window listener, and we're going to do the reverse, which is the window JavaScript code will actually be able to post a message to the Flutter app running inside the web page. So we're actually going to use messages, the basic message processor in Flutter, and the window listener on the HTML side, and we're going to be able to do bidirectional communication, right? So when I click the increment button here, what's going to happen, this is super demo, simple demo, right? We're going to increment this counter. The Flutter app is going to post an incremented message, and then the window listener on the website is going to pick up that message and log it. Super simple, right? Actually, I think it does more than that. It actually will append the message to the view frame. So if I increment this, right, we can see that Flutter fired a message. This is actually the Flutter debug console. And because it's running in an iframe, I could actually see a window and a parent. And so I just fired the same message to both. And it turns out that the window listener picked one of those up, and it picked this one up with the instance of minified, which means it's probably the iframe itself. All right, and if we look down here, what actually happened is, so we hit the increment button, right? And Flutter posted these, and then JavaScript received that message in its window listener, and it logged it, but it also appended it to the page. So this message here, action incremented, count is 1, location is minified. I can make this a little wider, right? So you can see that this message here is the same one we appended to the page. So if I do it again, we can see that we posted, Flutter posted 2 messages. One of them was received by JavaScript because of where the listener is sitting, and we can see that when the JavaScript picked it up, it actually posted it to the screen. Okay, so and so that's sort of interesting, right? Because it turns out, because the iframe is running in its own window, really, we get a little bit of different semantics. We just got to decide whether we want to run in an iframe or an HTML tag. So let me clear that. So we have the same thing here. So you can see here, in this case, it's running inside an HTML tag, not in an iframe, so not really in a viewport. And we can see that the Flutter app, this Flutter app, and because it's in an iframe, if you looked in some of the previous ones, the web server static contents on 4001, the static Flutter sites on 4002, and you actually saw 4002 in the logs before. Now you see 4001. That's actually because we're on the HTML page here, right? HTML element. So the location where this came from looks a little different, even though it came from the 4002 server, because we inserted it as a tag. It looks like 4001 a little bit. And that we can see down here at the bottom that the HTML window listener actually picked up the incremented on 4001, right? The same message that we logged here. So this is a demonstration of a Flutter app running 2 different ways. And the Flutter app, whenever it increments, actually sending a message to the window listener in JavaScript. So now let's do the reverse, right? What I want to do is I want to increment something, have HTML control post a message into its window messaging system, and then we have a listener running in Flutter that listens for window listener events. And so I'm going to click the increment Flutter in an iframe here, and that should cause this one to increment, and we should see messages posted, right? So this one's a little different. In this one, we incremented inside the Flutter app, so the only thing we got was the incremented message, ex post facto, after the fact message. In this case, we're going to increment Flutter in an iframe, so we're going to post a message to do the increment. Flutter is going to pick that up, and then it's going to post back, or actually notify in general, that we did an increment. So let me clear this and then see what happens here. So if I say increment Flutter in the iframe, we can see we went from 2 to 3. We can see that Flutter received a message called increment. And then when the actually incremented this, because we already had this hooked up, whenever Flutter actually does an increment operation, it actually posted the incremented messages, and it did it twice because it's in the iframe, and mostly because I'm a learning experience, not because it has to do that. And then we can see that JavaScript actually received the incremented. So we click the button here, JavaScript posted a message, the Flutter app incremented it, posted a did increment message, And then the JavaScript actually received back that it was incremented. So it actually created a mini feedback loop there. And if we scroll down here at the bottom, we can see that we also got another incremented message on the minified field, right? So this makes sense. We actually have 4 different increments here, 1, 2, and 3 on this one, and 1 on this one. But as I said, we can see how this works. So let's clear it. Let's just look at what the iframe one looks like. It's going to be super similar. We're going to increment the Flutter in a window. This is really incrementing the HTML element version of this. So it's going to go here. We should go to 2. And we see this. The Flutter received a message called increment. That's because this button actually did an increment. And then the Flutter message, Flutter did increment this from 1 to 2, and it did a incremented, should have been a did increment, and incremented, and then the JavaScript received that. So we have that feedback loop, right? So when we post here, we do an increment, we post did increment. When we post down here, we post a message to tell Flutter to do an increment, which it's listening for. And whenever it does an increment, it does post a message to say did increment, so any interested parties can be told. And so that's how that works, right? And it's super straightforward, very simple code. And should I do another video? Maybe I'll do another video of this. Anyway, so the place this is sitting, right, is this GitHub repo right here in the V1 app. And this actually drills down and gives you a feel for the various components in this one, right? And it talks about the fact that we are sitting in the 4001 server, and we have iframe code and JavaScript tag that actually loads the web app from the 4002 server. Ha! I was just kidding. I'm going to go the whole 10 minutes maybe. So this is actually how this app works. So on the, I'm just going to walk through this and see if this works out. So on the Flutter 4002 app, right, inside the Flutter app, we have a plus button, the increment button. Whenever we press that, it increments the counter, calls increment counter inside the Flutter app. And then what that does is it does a set state on the Flutter display widget, which makes sense, right? So it increments the counter, it refreshes the display. We see it go from 1 to 2, 2 to 3. And then it actually posts a message to the window using the HTML web library to post messages. It converts it to JavaScript and then it posts it, right? So it does a post message, action, incremented. And that's what I showed you before. And then what happens on the static site in the HTML part of the page is there's a window event listener, and it receives that message. That's actually built into index.html, and then it basically appends that to the message results and logs it, right? So whenever we press a button in the Flutter app, this is the flow that it goes through, and then it messages the Windows side, and the Windows side appended to that area in the log, and it also logged it into the debug log, right? So the reverse, though, let's go and look at what the reverse was. Let's see if I can actually make this visible. So what happens on the reverse is when the static site, we click one of the 2 buttons at the bottom, right? We had button for the target being the window and the target for being the parent. That was the one in the iframe and the one in the HTML tag. It does an on click, and then it does a message send, and it post that message either to the parent or the window. And so it sends an increment message. This is an action, the JSON action increment message. That message is there's actually an onMessage.listen running in HTML.window, onMessage.listen running inside the Flutter app. That thing actually calls the increment method function, the same increment function that we used for the button inside the Flutter app. And that does a set state, obviously, just like it did above, and the widget refreshes with the increment. And then because we did an increment, we're going to post an incremented message. So we post an action incremented, and the window listener picks that up, and that's the same window listener I described in the other one. So that's the images I wanted to run through, and I'm really done this time. Have a great day, and leave feedback. And, oh, the code, yeah, right, this is the repo where all this is in the V1 code. And that's it. Oh, I guess the only other piece is you can see here that I'm running 2 websites at once, 4001, which is the public one, and 4002, which is the Flutter app. Have a great day.